You're watching Extras from the Extension on Eagle Community Television. This show is brought to you by Caraco Implement.
Well, hello, I'm Stacy Campbell with K-State Research and Extension of Ellis County, and I'm joined today by Keith Harmoney, who is the range scientist here at the Hayes Agriculture Research Center. Keith, I appreciate you joining us today. And Keith, one of the things we were going to talk about, or I'd like to talk about today, is obviously we've been in a drought, probably going into our third year, maybe fourth year of drought. And then this abundant precipitation that we've had in May and June. I know that the experiment station has kept detailed weather records for many years, and also with your research and past range scientists, y'all know a lot about the grass production correlating to the precipitation. And through over 36 years of weather data and research, you guys have been able to show that May and June are a real strong indicator. The precipitation in May and June are a strong indicator of the rest of the year forage production. So I guess I wanted to talk about that. We were very dry, the first part of the year, and then we've had all this precipitation in June. So what might producers expect for the rest of the grazing season with all this precipitation we've had in June, but before that we were very dry?
Well, that's a good question to bring up, and we were really dry in May, like you said, and we've had a few years of drought, of dry conditions here on our research center and all throughout western Kansas,
right,
as far as dry conditions. And like you said, the research that we've done here, looking at pasture production and correlating that with our environmental conditions, mainly precipitation, it does have a strong correlation with end-of-year dry matter production. May and June precipitation, out of any 2-month period during the year, those are the 2 months combined that have the strongest relationship with end-of-year production.
Okay.
And since we started out May so dry, but in June we have had, an abundance of precipitation, really, compared to what our average for June precip usually is. Together, we are actually over what the average of May and June combined would be so far for this year. And I would expect, based on that we are going to have near average or above average production.
Okay.
Basically, that as long as a pasture has been able to maintain its plant density, hasn't lost any plant density due to the drought from the prior few years, those plants should be able to respond with adequate moisture. And we saw that back in the 1950s. 1956 was our driest year on record. And the very next year, in 1957, we had above average precipitation, and we also had above average pasture production that year. Just in only 1 year following our driest year on record, we were able to get above average production. And that's because we had above average precipitation. So we were able to get a response that very next year.
Okay.
And I would expect the same, since we've had good moisture in June. We still have over half of our growing season left.
Okay.
And so I would expect that the precipitation that we've received so far is going to go a long ways into actually being converted into dry matter production.
Okay. Now in the case of, I've had some producers just, really maybe right before these rains were saying, boy, we've noticed in our pastures, we've just had grass die. And so obviously stocking rate plays into that. And maybe in those cases where maybe stocking rates were higher, if they were, or where we've had grass die in some of those pastures, what might they expect in those situations?
Well, pastures that have a history of heavier utilization, greater utilization, and plant removal, heavier stocking rates over a period of time. History has shown us back in the 1930s, when we had extended drought periods, that those pastures that were grazed at a higher stocking rate did not have plants survive as long or recover as fast following the drought as those pastures that were stocked at a moderate or light rate or not stocked at all.
Okay.
So pastures during this drought period that we've had over the last 3 years, those pastures that have had heavier stocking rates, I would expect those are the pastures that could potentially have some plant density loss. Pastures that were stocked at a moderate rate, you wouldn't expect as much plant density loss, and those are the ones that are going to be able to respond better once we receive precipitation again like we did here in June.
Okay, and those pastures maybe where the stalking rate was heavier, they probably can expect to see a few more forbs coming back in other words, weeds. But if they're not noxious weeds, maybe not anything to really worry too much about.
Yeah, and when plant density is reduced, that gives an opportunity for other plants that you typically wouldn't see because of grass competition. You see more forbs come into those pastures. And it's not necessarily a bad thing,
right.
Because those open spaces, those forbs have the potential to help hold soil and stop water and precipitation once we do get rainfall again into those pastures, or more rainfall. So they do serve a purpose. And if stocking rates are reduced in those pastures to allow the grass to become more vigorous and compete, eventually even those forbs that maybe don't look as nice aesthetically out in pastures, those will be outcompeted by the grass eventually. And if you are having animals on those pastures where some of these forbs are coming in, grazing livestock, cattle will utilize forbs, especially early in the season.
Right.
So they will use those as a feed source early on too. So noxious weeds, I would definitely, you need to take care of those.
Right.
But other weed species or forb species, I would just monitor those and not necessarily get real excited about treating those, because they do serve a purpose.
Okay. All right. And then I guess maybe in closing here, you brought this out, and obviously just a soil probe here, and you were able to stick it down almost the full 36 inches. And we were talking, what, about a month or so ago, and your comment was just a couple inches.
Yeah, at the end of May, we were so dry in May. We had less than 1 inch of precipitation in May. And coming out here to probe, we were only able to get this soil probe, this moisture probe, into the ground just a couple inches. And out here today, we're able to push this thing down into the ground almost the full length of the probe.
Right.
So we have about 30 inches of soil moisture out here in the pastures right now,
so
which is a vast improvement over what we had in May.
Right, we probably gained 24 to maybe 28 inches here in just the last month with this 9+ inches of rain.
So our pastures are green and growing now, and looking much better than they did the prior month.
And you said too, in these pastures where y'all moderately stocked, just in June with this precipitation, you're back up to above average amount of grass for this time of year?
Yeah, we have as much grass right now as what we've had the last 3 or 4 years at this time period.
Okay.
So just in this short amount of time where we've gotten some precipitation, our grass production is really looking good right now.
And maybe kind of one of the take-home messages that producers aren't seeing, a big influx of grass in some of those pastures. They might need to step back and think about what their prior stocking rates have been. If they've been seeing the grass really diminish the last few years, maybe evaluate that and consider adjusting stocking rates possibly, if they're just not seeing this grass coming on with all this moisture.
It's good to know what your average grass production is going to be for a year. Over a long term, it's good to know what that average grass production should be, so that at the end of each season, if you're doing any monitoring, you can look at that and see how the last couple seasons have compared to prior. That May-June precipitation that you talked about earlier, we actually used that as a
management tool.
As a management tool in order for us to be able to make a decision then at the end of June whether or not we need to be destocking,
Okay.
reducing stocking rate for the remainder of the season.
Right.
So that May-June time period, if we don't have average precipitation by the end of June, we know that we are highly unlikely to have average production through the end of the year.
Okay.
So if we are stocking at a moderate average rate, we know that we may not be meeting those animal needs by the end of the season.
Right.
And so we actually have used that May-June precipitation as a factor in order for us to decide whether or not we're going to be early weaning or doing some early culling on our cow herd.
Right.
And we also used it to make a decision on whether or not we were even going to be keeping replacement heifers during especially the one extreme season we had a couple years ago, a couple growing seasons ago.
Well, Keith, we appreciate you being with us today. This has been Stacy Campbell with K-State Research and Extension of Ellis County, and Keith Harmoney with the Hayes Agricultural Research Center and Eagle Community Television.
You're watching extras from the Extension on Eagle Community Television. This show is brought to you by Carico Implement.
Spring is here, and that means it's time to come out and visit Carico Implement in Hayes, Kansas for all your lawn care needs. We stock and sell the full line of John Deere riding lawn equipment, along with Honda walk-behind mowers and generators. We also offer the full lineup of steel power products. If your project requires even more muscle, check out our full lineup of John Deere compact tractors and skid loaders. And don't forget, we have the parts and services to keep you up and running all spring long. So whatever your spring lawn care and maintenance needs are, come on out to Carico Implement for a solution that fits.